Welcome to the ASCD Symposium on Student Success in the Early Grades. My name is Jethro Jones. I am the host of the Transformative Principal podcast, and I'm excited to be with you today to talk about how virtual learning, play, and creativity can exist during COVID-19. I'm honored today to be joined by Colleen Hardiman. She is a principal in New York, and she's really the one who's done all the work for this. But I'm excited to be here with you sharing her story. Before we get started, I want to encourage you to engage in the chat during this live session because Colleen and I will be there to support you and give feedback and sharing your ideas. Furthermore, for all the resources, the slides, the handouts, and everything, you can go to jethrojones.com/play, where you can download everything that we're going to talk about here for yourself. That's jethrojones.com/play. Look forward to sharing this with you, and I'm going to turn it over to Colleen to introduce herself.
I am Colleen Hardiman. I'm the proud principal of the Early Learning Center at Smith School, which is in the Poughkeepsie City School District. Poughkeepsie is a city a little more than an hour north of New York City in New York State. And we have about 470 to 480 kindergarten and pre-kindergarten students each year in our building.
I want to also make sure that as we discuss these things today, part of the purpose of doing this is to be able to build relationships with our students and with our staff. So as you're thinking about the ways that you can use play and creativity, also remember that this helps build community and it helps build relationship in your school.
So I wanted to talk about play in three different ways: why we play, what is play, and how do we make play happen in our classrooms. And then we're going to look at some examples of things that teachers at the Early Learning Center are doing during the time that we've been in virtual learning for the COVID pandemic, and also then provide you with some ways that you can apply what you've learned here tomorrow in your classrooms. So the first question is, why play? And for children, play is really learning. We've heard play is the work of childhood, often attributed to Mr. Rogers. However, it was Piaget who first said that. And often in our classrooms, play is relegated to being relief from serious learning. It's the thing we do on Friday afternoon that students have the privilege, if they've done well during the week, to get to play. However, it's important that we integrate play throughout the day. It's an important time for students to learn. It's critical in developing their cognitive growth, their academic skills, and their social and emotional skills. At the ELC, we used purposeful play and play for a change. So a lot of the information that I'm sharing now is based on what we as a learning community found as we did book studies with those books.
As Colleen is talking, please list in the chat the ways that you can see how play helps kids' brains develop.
Play provides an opportunity for developmentally appropriate activities that children are self-directed and invent for themselves. It needs to be recognized as an important part of learning and promotes learning, especially in the areas that we focus on in these times of social emotional learning. It provides an opportunity for students to work together and collaborate, to build friendships, to take turns. It also provides an opportunity for critical thinking and cognitive skill development, academic skill development and practice, and social and emotional learning, as I just mentioned. Children, when they're playing, have the opportunity to examine, explore, experiment, and advance the skills that they are developing. And as you see on the screen, there are a number of different ways that children develop through play. Our next topic is what is play? And in Play for a Change, they define play as what children and young people do when they follow their own ideas in their own way and for their own reasons. If we're going to effectively implement play in the classroom, we need to understand its complexity. There are different kinds of play. You see some of those listed up on the screen, and we will look at some examples from the Early Learning Center of ways that children play. And there are also stages in the development of play. Children play individually. They might be observers of another child playing. They might play in parallel play where they're playing together, but they're playing separate things. And at the higher levels, they collaborate in their play. As we look at the kinds of play, there's fantasy or imaginative play. We often hear about dramatic play where children are pretending that they are doing something they've seen adults do. Or there's representational play where they might be acting out a story with puppets or with dolls. We see a lot of constructive play with blocks, using materials to create something. And there's often crosses between constructive play and dramatic play or representational play where students might use undefined materials like blocks or cardboard boxes to create something they need for the dramatic play if they need a cash register for the grocery store or something along those lines. Physical play includes large muscles and develops coordination. One of the things that we continue to work on is the level of risk that we can tolerate as adults. As children play, how much risk can we allow them to take? And one of the developments recently is something called Anji play. That's ANJI. In this type of play, which has really developed in China, natural materials such as clay pots, ropes, bamboo ladders, or even reclaimed objects like barrels or tires may be used within the play. And the students interact with those objects to create their own playground with their own rules.
And, one of my favorite parts of this video is the role of the teacher is really to document the crazy things that these kids are doing. And what I love about this is that she's allowing the kids to experiment and explore and play and have fun without being in a place where she has to micromanage and control every little bit, where she has to jump in and say, no, you can't do that, it's too dangerous. She's there making sure the kids are able to learn and grow in their own way, and it's just awesome.
So how do we make play happen? One of the most important things is providing time and space for the play, making it a priority, thinking about how playfulness and play can be brought into any lesson that you are planning for. Within the classroom, especially along the lines of that classroom management piece, create a clear framework of expectations. And once you have that, within that framework, you can allow almost complete freedom for the students when they understand what those expectations are. An important part of the learning is then taking time to reflect on the play. What happened? How did it happen? Why did it happen? As you saw in the video of the Anji play, as the students walk out on the board, they have to hold someone else has to hold the end of the board so that it won't tip over. And that's really a fulcrum. That's physics. And so talking about why that happens helps to forward the learning. And for teachers and administrators, think about what we are doing that may be confining the students' thinking and their creativity as we are putting a lesson forward. Convey to any visitors the importance of play in your classroom, why it is happening, and celebrate and share each other's successes and ideas. One of my favorite sayings is we're smarter together. So really looking for those opportunities to share when it really works for you.
So here I'd like to share a little story about how my daughter's school used this when she was in preschool and kindergarten, and one of the schools where I was a principal at. We implemented what was called Plan, Do, Review, and this really highlights each of the three areas here of how we make play happen. They provide a time for kids to play, and they set that time aside every single day. And at the beginning of that time, they had the kids plan what they were going to do for that activity. Now, some kids couldn't write, some kids could only draw, some kids weren't even very good at drawing, and so they found a way for them to plan what they could do through writing, through drawing, or through just pointing and talking about what they were able to do. And it was accessible for everybody, no matter their ability level. Then for the do part, the kids went and played, which was great. Time was set aside for that, and it worked out great. Then for the review part, the kids reflected on what they learned during that time of play. Sometimes it was talking about what they did, sometimes it was drawing, sometimes it was writing, but they gave kids multiple modalities to be able to reflect on what they were learning. And we found that that was a very effective way to help make sure that these three things happen every day. That you have the time planned for it, that you have framework and expectations, and that the kids have freedom within that framework and expectations, but then that they also reflect on their play, and they learn a lot through that reflection. Even if we can't specifically narrow it down to specific discrete skills, there's still a lot of power in being able to do that.
We want to take some time just to look at some examples of play that has been happening during our remote learning at the Early Learning Center. We actually closed March 13th was the last day of school that we had, and we have not reopened. We've been 100% remote learning since that time. That means that our kindergarten students came in for their first day of school as remote students. They didn't come into the building. They started school remotely. Our first example is a bat book that was made by a class. So each of the students has a page. The class had been learning about bats and learning the high frequency word is. They're also learning about pattern text. So all of these items are incorporated into the book that the class put together. Each of the students created their own bat and took a picture and sent it in to the teacher. The teacher put it together in this PowerPoint to create this book. And on each page it says, this is Marissa's bat, and so forth through the book. We did have a few times when we've distributed materials to our families since we've been in remote learning. And at one of those material distributions, the teacher distributed all the materials that the children would need to make their bats for this bat book. And then, of course, the students are very engaged in the book because they are in it and their classmates are in it, and they really enjoy going through it and reading it. At this point, note in the chat, how was students' thinking and creativity possibly limited in this activity? So our next activity came as part of our farm unit. And it's rather a standard lesson about how food comes to us from the farm. But the teacher added a playful element by having the students make butter. So I'm going to let you see what happened when the students turned in videos of themselves making butter based on this extra little activity, fun piece that the teacher added to this lesson. And as you watch the video, think about what learning you notice as Samanya makes her butter. And you can note that in the chat.
Hi friends. Look, here's the buttermilk and butter. And we take it all over in there in the living room. And now I'm gonna taste it.
What are we tasting?
The buttermilk and the butter.
Okay, and that's the butter, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like it?
Mm-hmm.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now let's
And
taste the buttermilk. Let me see.
it tastes good.
Tastes good.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Yes. We kept shaking it up all the way over there. I was standing right there by the fish tank. Show them.
Okay. Go ahead. Anything else you want to say to them?
Bye, friend. I just wanted to show you this.
All right, let's show them again.
See? Over there's the butter, that crunchy stuff, and that's the milk. Butter and
Buttermilk.
and butter. Okay? Make sure you remember that butter and buttermilk. Bye, friends.
As we move on to our next example, I want you to take a minute to think about all the language we heard Samanya using as she told us about the butter and the buttermilk that she had made. Our next example comes from our Kings and Queens unit. As students learned about castles, they told their families special features that castles have and if they would like living in a castle and why. So more opportunity for language development there. They then built castles with the special challenge of building a castle that they could actually fit in. And note in the chat what learning you notice as you see the castles that the children created. And they then shared these with their classmates and told them how they felt about building their castle and once they had accomplished that.
And one of the things that you'll also notice in looking at these pictures of these activities is that when students have work at home that is defined as play instead of as actual work that they need to do, you'll find that parents don't get as involved as they would if the kids are doing actual homework. So when you have play, it takes off the pressure on parents, on students, and on teachers to be able to allow the kids to play on their own. Parents are much more willing to allow kids to play than they are to just do schoolwork without getting involved in trying to make it there. We've all seen the science fair projects that we know were done by the parents, and the kids had a very small role in it. What we want to focus on is helping kids do things themselves. And again, when it comes to play, kids are much more able to do that by themselves, and parents feel a lot less pressure to push and make their kids do things or push their kids into ways that the kids may not be ready to go.
So our next example is one of my favorite activities that happened very early in our shutdown due to the pandemic. The class was talking about being afraid and feeling safe because of the social emotional impact that the shutdown of our schools and the pandemic in the community was having. A lot of our students were feeling afraid. And many in the class talked about being in bed or having a blanket that made them feel safe and secure. The class read several books where children build blanket forts. You might notice that Max in Where the Wild Things Are made a blanket fort, and they looked at all those blanket forts, and then they built blanket forts at home and shared pictures of their forts with the teacher. But in addition to that, the teacher built her own blanket fort, and on Friday evenings, they had story time. And the teacher sat in her blanket fort, and the children sat in their blanket forts to listen to the stories that the teacher read to them. Again, there are so many opportunities for learning here. I'm not sure that we could even list them all. One other example was a unit early this fall on the five senses, and the teacher, as one way for students to show what they had learned about the five senses, allowed them to do an activity with their parents to show something about fall and how they interacted with it with their five senses or one of their senses. And she got such great pictures and videos. It was a really playful way for students to show their learning, and the students came up with really creative ideas. So those are very interesting to see.
Something you can hear.
Rain.
The rain. Something you can touch. Your pumpkin. Something you can smell.
Cupcake.
Cupcakes. Good job. Something you can see.
Me.
Good job.
And then our final example is the Peace Rock project. And this involved our students with our community in the city of Poughkeepsie. The students in the springtime, often we have a field trip that travels to the Children's Museum in the city of Poughkeepsie, but because of the pandemic shutdown, we weren't able to do that. The Children's Museum started a Peace Rock garden outside of their building and invited our students to make peace rocks to contribute to the garden. So the students selected rocks from their environment and then designed painting or coloring or markers they used to make a design and a message on their rock. They created their own message, and they joined the community by adding their rocks to the Peace Garden, either by going down to the Children's Museum on their, with their family on their own, or bringing their rocks to our school, and we then brought them down. And now they can even visit their rocks down at the Peace Garden when they want to. So it was a real opportunity to integrate our school with the city of Poughkeepsie community around us. So for the most part, the examples that I've shared here are constructive play. However, while doing virtual learning, there are a lot of additional ways that children can play. One thing I'm not sure that we focused on at the beginning, one thing that I'm not sure that we really talked about at the beginning are games with rules. And as children get just a little bit older, say 7 or 8 years old, you might notice that their focus is all about the rules. The majority of their playtime may be just discussing what the rules will be for the game. So when you're playing virtually, you can also do games with the students. You might do Would You Rather. For young children, would you rather kiss a frog or hug a snake? Would you rather have a magic carpet that you can fly around on or have your own robot? If you Google Would You Rather, all kinds of questions come up that you can use with students. You could do a game where a child is the person who's going to pretend to be something. It could be something related to your current curriculum, or it could be just, be an animal or be whatever you want. And the other students have to guess, given clues or ways that the child acts, what the child is. They could play I Spy, where you see in behind them in their home something that starts with a particular letter, and the children on the virtual meeting get to try and guess what it is that the child says I spy about. There could also be role playing, where you have students retell or act out a story, even in that virtual environment, or they could play at being the teacher for the day. So there are all a myriad of opportunities, and you could put in the chat any ideas that you have of ways that the different kinds of play could be implemented even in a virtual environment.
One of the ways that you can bring in imaginative play and fantasy play into into what you're doing every day is having kids take different objects in their home and recreate stories. That can be as you're reading a book on Zoom, they are recreating that story with toys and figurines in their home, or it could be something where they're retelling stories to the class using figurines to represent the different people of things that they have experienced. All of those ways of bringing that fantasy and role-playing into the classroom really do help kids learn to articulate and use their language to help express what is going on. And when it feels like play, again, it's easier for you to get to know them and understand who they are and what they care about in their life. So we'd like to get into some practical applications now, where we're going to talk about how you can actually bring play into your school. And the first thing we want to talk about is confining the children's thinking. Sometimes we put up barriers when they don't need to exist. What confining thinking do I exhibit most? I want you to think about that and reflect. Put your answers in the chat and think about the ways that you confine the thoughts of the children. Colleen, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what confining their thinking means?
Often when you set up an environment for play, without even realizing, especially us as adults, we create a situation that confines the creativity and the ways that children can play. For example, when we did the castles, the children, they could do anything with any materials because they were in their homes and they would just go with whatever they could get from their family. When we're in the classroom, if we were to ask children to build a castle in the classroom, they're limited to the materials that we're providing them in the classroom. So one of the things that I always ask my teachers when I'm doing observations or walking through their classrooms is, what is there in this lesson that might be confining the creativity or the thinking that our children can do? And one of the answers with those materials is just to ask students, what would you like to have to be able to build your castle? And they come up with the most ingenious ideas.
Another way that we can confine their thinking is through the examples and models that we use. Sometimes when we create something, it limits the kids' ability to come up with their own ideas because they're trying to emulate exactly what we're doing. And that's not what we want to do all the time. Sometimes we want to have a model that's an exemplar that they can follow and try to create something like it. But other times we really want them to create their own thing. And I think Colleen's example there of the limitations of what they have in the classroom is beneficial. So asking how they can add more, what else we can bring in to do that, is beneficial. Here is a lesson plan review that you can use to make a change right away going into school on Monday. If you take a look at your lesson plans, or if you're a principal and you look at your teacher's lesson plans, you can ask these 3 questions to help the teacher identify play, identify creativity, and then think about ways that their own efforts are confining their thinking. So let's go through this. So first, how will you bring a sense of play into this lesson? This is a good way to just ask for a little example of how do you make it something that feels like it's play and is something that the kids can feel like isn't a task to do, but something fun that they can be engaged in. Second, how are kids showing creativity? What does that look like? What ways are they showing that they can be creative? And this doesn't always have to be artistic, but it involves creating something. And so don't be limited by thinking about creativity as only artistic endeavors. And finally, the third question is, what are you doing that is confining their thinking? What are you doing as a teacher that is limiting their ability to think creatively and play effectively? These are important questions to ask, and as you do this, you can make a real change in your practice starting on Monday. Once again, I want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been great chatting with you. It's been great sharing this wonderful work at Colleen's School with you. If you'd like to reach out to either one of us, you can see our emails are there on the screen, or you can go to jethrojones.com/play, and that will allow you to connect directly with us as well and get copies of everything that we've shared here so that maybe you want to share this with your staff later. That would be great. We really want to emphasize how important it is for kids to play and how much that builds our relationships with them. Final comments from you, Colleen.
I'd also like to say thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope that you found the information that we shared very beneficial, and as Jethro said, that you'll be able to apply it right away Monday in your classroom.
We do have a couple minutes left, so if you are watching this live, Colleen and I will stay in the chat to answer your questions here in the chat. And again, make sure you go to jethrojones.com/play to connect with us further. Thanks so much for being here.